Hi, this is Mike from Minimal 3DP, and today I'm doing the second of my two-part series on installing a Bigtreetech SKR Mini E3 version 3 in an Ender 3. In this part 2 video, I will be configuring, compiling, and then installing the new firmware. It should be noted that in this set of firmware, I have an EasyABL Pro installed on the Ender 3. So as part of the configurations, I will have to go through and configure the EasyABL for use. My first step in this process is going to be to take a look at the Bigtreetech Github page. And looking at their GitHub repository, I'm looking at the repo for Bigtreetech SKR Mini E3. I'm going to go to firmware, version 3, and then Marlin. Now it looks like they have some pre-configured firmware here. I'm not interested in that. I want to compile my own, so I'm going to go to Ender 3. And I want to, I think, start off with the stock firmware, so I'll click that. Now, the first thing I'm noticing is this is showing as at least 3 months old. This is just too old for my use. That's not what I want. I mean, the firmware I want to use, ideally bug fix 2.1x. So let's just leave this up, and then I'm going to go ahead to the Marlin firmware page, and I want to just see what configurations are available there. So I can click download, scroll down. Here's 2.1 bug fix snapshot. That's what I'm interested in. I'm going to click View and Download Configurations, and then I'm going to go to Config and Examples. Now this is where it gets a little bit confusing. They do have a Bigtreetech or BQ folder here. I'm actually going to skip that and go right down to Creality and then look for the Ender 3. So when I click on the Ender 3, there's a config for the SKR Mini E3 V3. So I can go there. That's 2 days old. That's exactly what I want. So in order to, my next steps is going to be configuring my development environment on my machine, and I'll walk you through that. First thing I do is switch over to GitHub Desktop. And in my Marlin repository of my machine, I'm in bug fix 2.1x. I'm going to go ahead and hit fetch upstream just to make sure I have all the current changes. So I'm good to go. Then what I'm going to do is create a new branch. So I'm going to click the branch menu item and new branch. I'm going to select my new branch is going to be from bugfix 2.1.x, and I want to call this Ender 3 SKR, and I'm going to do E3-3 because instead of just calling it SKR 3, mainly because I have a new SKR 3 board that I'm going to do a video on installing that in the machine. Okay, so I have it named. I have the bug fix 2.1.x as the branch, and then I'm just going to say create new branch. And at the top here in GitHub Desktop, I'm going to go ahead and publish that branch to GitHub. That way, again, it's not just on my machine, it's also on GitHub. So everything's up to date. So now we need to switch over to VS Code. From GitHub, I switch over to VS Code, so I have my project open here. Now, just a couple checks I make is I have a terminal open here at the bottom, so I type in git status, and I notice I'm on the correct branch, so that's good. Now I'm going to make a couple quick changes here. I'm going to go to the platform io.ini file, and I need to make sure I'm using the correct board, which is right here. And to do that, the easiest way to do that, I'm going to switch back over real quick to my browser. And I'll go over again to the Bigtreetech website. And I'm going to look at their platform.io file. Click on that. And here's the board. So I'm just going to copy that. And then go back over to VS Code and paste that in. So now I should have the correct board. Save my file. So I have the correct board. So that's good. I'm still on the correct branch. Check down the bottom. I always watch that again just to make sure if I make any changes. So I'm opening up configuration.h, and then I'm going to navigate over again to the browser and go to the Marlin configs that I found. I'll go to configuration.h, click on that so it loads. I'm going to go ahead and hit raw, and I'm going to hit select all, copy this code. I'm going to go back over to VS Code, click in my configuration.h file, select all, delete it, and then paste in the new code. That is really ugly. There we go. I'm going to save it. So now that's in there. And I'm going to open up, select all in the configuration_advanced.h. I'll delete that. And I'll go back over to the browser. And I'm going to hit the back button. And I'm going to go back over and open up the configuration_advanced.h. Click raw again. Select all. Copy. Go back over to VS Code. Paste it in. Go ahead and save. So now I have that all correct. What you need to do, since you've added files and we've saved them, so we have the base configuration in there and the platform.io file correct. Let's go down into our terminal here, and we're going to type git add dot, and that'll go ahead and add the new files to the repo. Let's go ahead and type in git status. Okay, there's the new files and the changes. So let's do git commit. So I do git commit -a -m and then put in my comment. I'm going to put yep, and then I want to push that. Okay, so I've pushed that up. Now, before I make any further configuration changes, because I probably am going to make a couple of changes here, I want to go ahead and just make sure everything works. Now, I use Auto Build Marlin in VS Code, the extension, so I'm going to click on that. I'm going to click on Show ABM Panel, and then I'm going to use this first one here, and I'm going to click Build. Now, I just want to make sure this builds correctly before I make any other changes. Because if it builds correctly, then I know at least I have a good starting point. So this is going to take a couple minutes to run. And then I'll pause the video and then show you the results. You'll see down here at the bottom of my screen in VS Code in the terminal that the software successfully compiled. So that's good. Now I can rest easy that any changes I make moving forward, I know the base that I'm using compiles. And so after I make each set of changes, I can go back, recompile, and just, again, make sure everything's working. Now, since I've run a successful build and I'm about to make changes, what I'm going to do is in Auto Build Marlin here, I'm going to go ahead and hit this clean button and just get rid of all the files that were generated, because I'll run this again here in a couple minutes once I make some changes. So my first step is going to be to go to the EasyABL firmware setup for vanilla Marlin on TH3D's website, and I'll put a link for this in the show notes. So go into this, and then I'm going to look over those instructions. And the first thing I have is, now that this was written on an older version of Marlin, but I think I'll be okay. I'm going to start with configuration.h. So the very first thing they have me do is the default max feed rate needs to be set to, for Z needs to be set to 15 rather than 5, so I'm going to copy that. And then while I'm at, let me arrange my screen so hopefully we can see both things simultaneously. Good. So I'm going to go over to VS Code, go to the find function, and find that default max feed rate. And here it's set to, and I can see that the X is 200, Y 200, Z is 5. Change that to 15. So that's done. Next, copy the Z probe fast, go over here and paste that into the find. And I'm going to change that to 15 times 60 as per the instructions. Next, I'm going to look for all of these. And let me go ahead and I'll make these changes and then switch this back. Then I'll switch back and all the changes will be made, but you don't need to sit here and help me go through each thing. I was able to go ahead and do all of these various changes according to TH3D help site. I'm now down to set your probe offsets, and I'm going to go over here to the Thingiverse page for the PetsFang, and I'm using the PetsFang E3D V6 Easy ABL, so I need X is positive 48, Y is minus 2. I'm going to go in here in VS Code and make those changes. So that's 48 minus 2, and then Z should be 0. And then I'm going to go back and continue to make the changes as described by TH3D. And I'll just keep scrolling down here. Probe margin is set to 30. Let's go ahead and change that right here. Individual axis homing menu. Uncomment that. And I want to go ahead and save my changes there in configuration.h. Now I'm switching over to configuration_advanced.h. So let's go ahead and open that file up. First thing I want to do is baby stepping, so I'm going to copy that and then search. Baby stepping is enabled. Double click Z. Baby stepping, that's already enabled. Double click, max interval is 2000. Let's change that. Baby step Z offset. That's right here, so we need to uncomment that. Baby step Z probe, GFX overlay. So uncomment that. And that appears to be all my changes. So let's save that. And as I mentioned previously, I'm going to open up Marlin Auto Build. And let's verify that this actually builds. And I'll pause the video while we start it. And then I'll go ahead and pause the video and come back to this. As you can see here at the bottom of VS Code, that compiled successfully. So now I'm going to move on to my next set of changes. My next change is going to be in the configuration_advanced.h. This is a quality of life change I always make. I'm going to go ahead and enable the probe offset wizard. I use that regularly. I want that, so let's go ahead and save it. I'm not going to recompile, I already know that'll work. So let's move on to the next set of changes. I've done a previous video on this. Next I'm going to work on features that optimize for Octoprint. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes for this site. And I just recommend making these changes. And again, up at the top you should see a link to a video I did in the past with enabling these features. Again, to optimize for using your printer for Octoprint. So I've gone ahead and completed all Octoprint optimization changes. So I just want to go ahead and save those changes. Go back over to Auto Build Marlin. And I'm going to hit clean up my last build. And then let me just check to make sure these changes work. I'll click build, and let that go, and then I'll come back once this is finished. Okay, the firmware is compiled successfully. So now what I need to do is just go ahead and copy the firmware over to an SD card and go ahead and install it on my printer just to make sure everything works. To copy the firmware to the SD, I'm just going to, in Visual Studio Code, go ahead and click on where it says build. We'll go ahead and open it up in Finder for me. And Internet Explorer if you're on Windows. So I'm just going to copy the bin file, my micro SD card. That's that. I'll go ahead and eject it. And then I'll switch over to my printer. Going over to my printer, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. This takes a minute. And I'm going to check if the new firmware has been installed. And of course my screen's too bright so you can't see it here. I've tried adjusting and I can't get it where you're going to be able to see it well. So what I'm going to do is I'm checking, and I had updated the description of the firmware so I can tell it's updated, installed my new firmware. I'm going to go ahead over and let me switch my camera angle, and then we'll look and see if it homes. I'm looking at the printer. Let's just go ahead and try this. Okay, that actually has gone to the middle of the board. The middle of the bed. So that looks correct. Let me go ahead and try movement. I'll try moving it up, down. I'll try moving it X, Y, and Z. Just so that way we can test various directions. Make sure it looks like it's going correct. So that looks correct. So let's try Y. Moving up, and that's looking good. It's also incredibly quiet. So let me go ahead and I'm going to call this a day. I believe everything's working correctly. Now I just need to go ahead and level the printer, and I can go ahead and do a test print. I'll go ahead and just post the test prints separate. Right now I'm very confident everything's working correctly. This is Mike from Minimal 3DP. Thank you for joining me today for the second part of my series on installing a Bigtreetech Mini E3 version 3 board in my Ender 3. In this video, we covered configuring Marlin to make everything work. I've gone ahead and installed the updated firmware and everything appears to be good. The last thing I need to do is just configure the printer and go ahead and level the bed. And then in a separate video, maybe I'll just post a bed sheet. But I hope you have a good day. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. Thanks. SKR.